Welcome to Cop26 Countdown. I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams. We are looking back at the biggest moments of the day from the UN Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, Scotland. With just days left in the conference, Cop26 organizers have released a first draft of an agreement laying out how governments can work together to combat the climate crisis. The draft emphasizes the need for countries to cut CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030. And ask governments to update their formal carbon cutting goals by the end of 2022. The draft also calls for countries to urge one another to accelerate the phasing out of coal and subsidies for fossil fuels, but doesn't include firm dates or targets on the issue. Another key point: climate finance for developing countries. The draft recognizes more aid is needed beyond the $100 billion a year as promised in the Paris Agreement, and calls for developed countries to boost pledges, including doubling funds to help with adaptation, loss, and damage. Now, keep in mind that whatever comes out of COP26 has to be unanimously approved by nearly 200 nations attending the negotiations. A final report is scheduled for release Friday, but may push past that deadline. Regardless, the pressure is on.
The clock is ticking, the end of the COP is in sight. So for a presidency, this is the moment where it needs to step forward, and I think the UK is trying with its paper now to draw a number of critical threads together to allow consensus to drive the resolution of those areas that are difficult to resolve.
So we've got those negotiations happening behind the scenes, but meanwhile, transportation was front and center at today's talks, which included pledges to help the world get around a little greener. Here's climate specialist Carl Parker with the highlights.
Transportation was the official topic of the day.
Transportation is responsible for over 24% of the global carbon emissions, which lead to air pollution. Cutting down such carbon emissions has benefits for health, economies, as well as reducing inequalities. And yet, action on reducing emissions is not happening fast enough. As a young person who will be impacted today by the decisions made, I call upon you all to work together to effectively make zero-emission vehicles the new normal for current and future generations to come.
Countries and businesses may be listening, from planes.
As we know, it's a significant contributor to climate change, and that without dramatic, urgent action, there will be substantial additional growth in emissions over the next 30 years. So in the US, we are making up for lost time, accelerating our action and our commitments. And I'm pleased to share that the US just released our Aviation Climate Action Plan. We set a goal of net zero emissions for US aviation by 2050.
To ships.
Maritime, with international greenhouse emissions equivalent to the world's 6th largest polluting state, is no exception. The UK, and indeed many of the countries, companies and NGOs here today, believe zero-emission international shipping is possible by 2050.
To vehicles.
We have urged governments and manufacturers to commit to end the sale of polluting vehicles. Since 2019, globally, the number of zero-emission vehicles on the road has nearly doubled. We are on the cusp of a new age of road transport. Whilst this progress is remarkable, there is further to go. And we must ensure that the transition to clean transport is global.